The courtroom was unusually quiet. Not the calm kind of quiet, but the kind that pressed against your chest, making it hard to breathe. The kind that settles in when everyone knows a life is about to change forever. Wooden benches were filled with strangers who had come for entertainment disguised as justice. Reporters sat frozen, fingers hovering over keyboards. Lawyers adjusted their ties, ready to move on to their next case. And in the center of it all, sitting confidently beside his legal team, was Ethan Blake. He looked relaxed, almost amused. A faint smile rested on his lips, the smile of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided, because in his mind it had. Across the aisle sat Laura Blake, soon to no longer be Blake at all. She wore a simple grey dress, no jewelry, no makeup. Her hair was tied back neatly, almost severely. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, fingers intertwined, unmoving. She hadn't cried once, not when the accusations were read, not when her character was questioned, not even when Ethan's lawyer suggested she had contributed nothing to the marriage. She simply sat there, silent, and that silence made everyone uncomfortable. Ethan leaned toward his attorney and whispered, his voice barely hiding his satisfaction. "She's done. Look at her. She knows she's lost." His lawyer nodded, glancing briefly in Laura's direction. "She has no financial leverage, no witnesses, no support. This is a clean win." Ethan leaned back in his chair. For months he had rehearsed this moment in his mind. The divorce papers he had served her while her father lay unconscious in the ICU, the way she had stared at him in disbelief when he said, "I can't do this anymore." The cold relief he felt when he walked away, convinced he was finally free of a life that no longer fit his ambitions. He told himself he had outgrown her quiet strength, outgrown her loyalty, outgrown the small, simple life she believed in. In his world now, success demanded more money, more status, more admiration. And Laura, she was just a reminder of who he used to be. Ethan glanced at her again. She didn't look up, didn't beg, didn't protest, didn't fight. To him, her silence was surrender. The judge cleared his throat, flipping through the final pages of the case file. "Mrs. Blake," he said, adjusting his glasses, "before I issue my ruling, is there anything you wish to add?" The entire courtroom turned toward her. Laura lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were calm, too calm for a woman about to lose her marriage, her home, and nearly everything she owned. She stood. For a brief moment it looked like she might speak, but then she shook her head gently. "No, Your Honor," she said softly. "I have nothing to add." A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan's smile deepened. That was it. The end. The judge nodded. "Very well." He raised his gavel, and just as he was about to bring it down, the courtroom doors slammed open. The sound echoed sharply, cutting through the silence like a blade. Everyone turned. 2 court officers stepped aside instinctively, and then a man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was streaked with gray, his posture straight despite his age. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He moved with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed permission. Behind him followed a woman in a Navy power suit, clearly a senior attorney, and another man carrying a briefcase thick with documents. The judge stiffened. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "This court is in session." The man stopped at the center of the aisle. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't look at the spectators. He looked directly at Laura. And for the first time since the trial began, Laura's expression changed. Her shoulders relaxed, her jaw unclenched, her eyes softened. The man turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deep, steady, and unmistakably commanding. "With all due respect, this case is not over." The courtroom fell completely silent. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. His lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Whoever this is, he has no standing in." The judge raised a hand. "Name?" he asked. The man answered without hesitation. "My name is Richard Hale." Laura exhaled slowly. Ethan's lawyer froze. The color drained from his face. Ethan leaned toward him. "Who is that?" The lawyer swallowed hard. "Her father." Ethan's heart skipped. "That's impossible," he whispered. "He was in a coma." She said. Richard Hale took one step forward. "I was," he said calmly, "and then I woke up." The judge leaned forward, suddenly attentive. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "what is your involvement in this matter?" Richard turned slightly, gesturing toward Laura. "My daughter chose silence," he replied. "Not because she is weak, but because she trusted me to speak when it mattered." He nodded toward the woman beside him. "My legal counsel has just filed a motion with this court." The attorney stepped forward, handing documents to the clerk. "Your Honor," she said confidently, "we request an immediate pause in these proceedings." Ethan's confidence began to crack. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Richard Hale looked at Ethan for the first time. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with the kind of calm that only comes when someone knows they already hold all the cards. Ethan had walked into court believing he had won. He thought this divorce was the end of a chapter. He had no idea. The real game had just begun, and the man who was about to play it was not the woman he had underestimated, but the father he never saw coming. The courtroom no longer felt neutral. Something invisible had entered the room with Richard Hale. Something heavy, deliberate, and unmistakably dangerous. Ethan Blake sat frozen in his chair, his earlier confidence evaporating by the second. His fingers gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The judge adjusted his glasses, studying the documents handed to him by the clerk. "Mr. Hale," he said slowly, "your daughter has already declined to make a statement. This case is nearing conclusion." Richard Hale nodded calmly. "And that," he replied, "is exactly why I am here." He turned slightly, placing a reassuring hand on Laura's shoulder. "My daughter remained silent because she believed in dignity," he continued. "But silence should never be mistaken for surrender." Ethan's lawyer stood up again, his voice sharper now. "Your Honor, this is a clear attempt to delay the inevitable. Mrs. Blake has no financial claim beyond what has already been presented." Richard smiled faintly. "Then you won't mind what comes next." He gestured toward his attorney. "Proceed." The woman in the navy suit stepped forward with quiet authority. "Your Honor," she began, "we are submitting new evidence related to the marital assets, corporate interests, and offshore holdings connected to Mr. Ethan Blake." Ethan shot to his feet. "That's absurd," he snapped. "I disclosed everything, every account, every asset." Richard turned to him, his voice steady. "No," he said. "You disclosed what you wanted to disclose." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The judge raised his gavel. "Order." Laura remained seated, but her posture had changed. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She was waiting. The attorney continued. "Our forensic auditors completed a preliminary review last night. The results indicate substantial undisclosed income streams routed through shell corporations in Luxembourg and Singapore." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "That's confidential business," he said quickly, "completely unrelated to this marriage." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "When you used marital funds to establish those companies," he replied, "they became very much related." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Blake," he said, "is this true?" Ethan hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But it was enough. "Your Honor," his lawyer interrupted, "this is corporate complexity, not deception. These structures are legal." "Legal does not mean transparent," the judge said sharply. The courtroom buzzed. Ethan glanced at Laura. For the first time she met his eyes. There was no anger in her gaze, only clarity, and that terrified him. Richard Hale took a slow step closer. "You thought this divorce was a transaction," he said quietly, "a clean exit." He shook his head. "You walked away from my daughter while she sat beside a hospital bed, praying I would wake up." Ethan swallowed. "You served her divorce papers," Richard continued, "while she was deciding whether to sign a DNR for her own father." The courtroom went silent. "I taught my daughter many things," Richard said. "Patience, Grace, loyalty. He paused. I did not teach her to beg. Laura's lawyer placed another document on the table. Your Honor, she said, we request immediate discovery access to all corporate records tied to Mr. Blake over the last 7 years. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. This is harassment. Richard didn't flinch. No, he replied. This is accountability. The judge leaned back, exhaling slowly. This court will grant the request, he said. Proceedings are paused pending financial review. The gavel came down. Bang! The sound echoed through the room. Ethan's victory, gone. The spectators whispered. Reporters began typing furiously. Ethan sat back down slowly, his chest tight. Laura finally stood. She turned toward him. Her voice was calm, but every word landed like a verdict. I didn't stay quiet because I was weak, she said. I stayed quiet because I knew you would speak enough for both of us. She looked at her father. Richard met her gaze and nodded once. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Ethan Blake walked out surrounded by questions. Laura walked out surrounded by certainty. And Richard Hale walked behind her, not as a man seeking revenge, but as one who had waited patiently for the moment when truth could no longer be ignored. By the next morning, Ethan Blake's name was everywhere, not in headlines yet, but in whispers. Inside glass offices, across quiet phone calls, in boardrooms where decisions were made without emotions. The pause in the divorce proceedings had triggered something far bigger than Ethan realized. He sat alone in his corner office, staring at the city skyline that once made him feel invincible. His phone buzzed non-stop, but he ignored it. His tie lay loosened on the desk, his coffee untouched. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. His assistant knocked hesitantly. Mr. Blake, legal is on line 3, and compliance wants an emergency meeting. Ethan closed his eyes. Tell them I'll call back. As soon as the door shut, he grabbed his phone and dialed his lawyer. What the hell is happening? He demanded the moment the line connected. You said this case was airtight. The lawyer hesitated. That was before Richard Hale walked in. Ethan's jaw tightened. He's just an old man. He woke up at the right time, that's all. Silence. Then, quietly, Ethan, Richard Hale is not just any man. Ethan stood up. Explain. He founded Hale Global Capital, the lawyer said carefully. Private equity, infrastructure, defense logistics. His name doesn't appear often, but when it does, markets listen. Ethan's chest tightened. That's impossible. Laura never mentioned, because she didn't need to, the lawyer replied. You never asked. Ethan hung up. His mind raced backward through memories. The modest apartment Laura insisted they live in, her refusal to upgrade cars, her discomfort at flashy events. He had called it simplicity. Now it felt like camouflage. Across town, Laura sat in a quiet cafe with her father. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the faint scar near Richard Hale's wrist, the result of a heart surgery most people didn't think he would survive. You didn't have to come, Laura said softly. I could have handled it. Richard stirred his tea. You could have, he said, but you shouldn't have had to. Laura stared at her hands. I thought loving him meant staying quiet, supporting him, making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Richard looked at her. And when did that love stop being mutual? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Richard reached into his briefcase and slid a thin folder across the table. Your trust has matured, he said calmly. Fully. Laura froze. What? The offshore investment portfolio your mother and I established before. You were married, Richard continued. It crossed valuation thresholds this quarter. He met her eyes. You are now the majority beneficiary. Laura swallowed. How much? Richard exhaled slowly. 1.3 billion. The number sat between them like a living thing. Laura didn't smile. Didn't he gasp? She just closed her eyes. So that's why he left, she said quietly. Because he thought I was nothing. Richard leaned forward. He didn't leave because you were nothing, he said. He left because he couldn't see value unless it reflected him. Meanwhile, Ethan's world began to tilt. The first call came from his bank. Routine compliance review, they said. The second came from a partner who suddenly needed distance. By afternoon, the board requested a private meeting. By evening, his accounts showed temporary restrictions. Ethan paced his apartment, phone pressed to his ear. "This is retaliation," he told his lawyer. "They're using influence." The lawyer's voice was flat. "They're using records." That night, Ethan slept poorly. For the first time, Laura wasn't beside him, and for the first time, he realized how much she had quietly held together. 2 days later, the court ordered formal discovery. Every account, every shell company, every transaction. Ethan sat across from a team of auditors, sweat collecting at his collar. Across the room, Laura observed quietly. She didn't interrupt, didn't accuse. She simply watched, and Ethan hated that more than anything. During a break, he approached her. "You planned this," he said bitterly. "You waited." Laura looked at him calmly. "No," she replied. "I survived." She stepped closer. "You didn't lose because of my father," she said. "You lost because you believed silence meant ignorance." She walked away before he could respond. And for the first time since the divorce began, N felt something crack inside him. Not anger, not fear, but the realization that the woman he underestimated had already moved far beyond him. By the time the news broke, Ethan Blake was already losing control. The first article appeared online just after midnight. No accusations, no conclusions, just facts. Court orders financial discovery in high-profile Blake divorce case. It was enough. By morning, Ethan's inbox was flooded. Journalists, analysts, investors pretending to be concerned friends. His name, once associated with ambition and success, now sat uncomfortably beside words like audit, undisclosed assets, and conflict of interest. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. This wasn't supposed to be public. The divorce was supposed to be clean, quiet, controlled. Laura was supposed to disappear. Instead, she had become the calm center of a storm he couldn't contain. Across the city, Laura stood in front of a mirror in her father's apartment, adjusting a simple navy blazer. "You don't need to change who you are," Richard said from behind her. "I know," Laura replied. "But today, I need to be seen." Richard nodded. The media had requested a statement. Laura had declined. Not yet. Silence had served its purpose. Now, timing mattered. Back at Ethan's firm, the board meeting was brutal. Not loud, not dramatic. Worse, quiet, measured, cold. The chairman folded his hands. "Ethan, compliance has flagged inconsistencies. Until clarification, your decision-making authority is temporarily suspended." Ethan felt the room spin. "Suspended?" he snapped. "Based on rumors? Based on documents?" another board member replied. Ethan leaned forward. "This is a personal matter." The chairman met his gaze. Personal matters stop being personal when they risk the company. The vote was unanimous. Temporary removal. Ethan walked out of the feeling smaller than he ever had. That afternoon, Laura finally spoke. Not to the press, to the court. She filed a sworn statement. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was devastating in its simplicity. She outlined how she had stepped back from her own career to support Ethan's, how she had signed documents she trusted him with, how she had believed partnership meant protection, and how, when she needed him most, he walked away. The judge read every word, so did Ethan. For the first time, the story wasn't about money. It was about character. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment. No Laura, no calls, no reassurance. Just his reflection in the dark window. He opened his laptop and searched her name, Laura Blake. There were no scandals, no interviews, no posts, just one photo, a charity gala from years ago. Laura stood beside her father, smiling gently, almost invisible among powerful men. Ethan stared. How had he missed it? How had he mistaken humility for weakness? The next court session was packed. The judge ruled swiftly, expanded discovery, asset freezes, restrictions. Ethan's lawyer whispered urgently, "This is getting out of hand." Ethan didn't respond. He was watching Laura. She sat calmly, composed, her hands steady, no triumph, no vengeance, just resolve. Richard Hale sat beside her, silent but unyielding. The judge looked directly at Ethan. "Mr. Blake," he said, "this court takes transparency seriously." Ethan nodded stiffly. He had no choice. Outside, cameras flashed. This time, Laura didn't turn away. She didn't smile. She simply walked forward, steady, unafraid, and the world took notice. That evening, Ethan received one final message. Not from his lawyer, not from the board, from Laura, just one sentence. "I stayed quiet so the truth could speak for itself." Ethan stared at the screen long after it went dark. For the first time, he understood something that came far too late. The woman he thought he had defeated was never playing the same game. Ethan Blake woke up to silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes when the world is moving without you. His phone lay face down on the nightstand. No missed calls, no messages. The people who once needed him every hour had suddenly disappeared. He turned the phone over. One notification, bank alert, account access restricted. His chest tightened. He sat up, refreshing the screen, hoping it was a glitch. Another alert appeared, pending legal review. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was about exposure. At Hale Global's private offices, Laura sat in a conference room overlooking the city, not as a guest, as an owner. Executives spoke carefully now, respectfully. She listened more than she talked, just like always. Richard sat beside her, reviewing documents. "The auditors finished early," he said calmly. "Worse than expected." Laura didn't react. "How bad?" she asked. Richard looked at her. "He moved funds during your marriage, used joint signatures. You're legally entitled to far more than half." Laura closed her eyes briefly. "Not from greed, from grief. I never wanted this," she said. Richard nodded. "I know, but wanting doesn't change what's right." The headlines hit that afternoon. Not sensational, accurate. CEO faces financial scrutiny amid divorce proceedings. Ethan's photo accompanied the article, a photo from a time when confidence came easily. He barely recognized himself. Calls started coming in again, but not the kind he wanted. Regulators, former partners, lawyers he'd never hired. Every conversation ended the same way. "We need clarification." In court, the judge made a ruling that changed ever. Marital asset division would now include retroactive financial review. 7 years. Every transaction. Ethan's lawyer leaned in. "This is unprecedented." The judge replied coolly. So was the deception. Laura sat quietly, hands folded. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She was letting the truth finish what silence had started. Outside the courthouse, a reporter called out, "Miss Blake, do you feel vindicated?" Laura stopped. She turned slowly. "I don't feel vindicated," she said calmly. "I feel free." She walked away before another question could be asked. That night, Ethan finally broke. He called Laura. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "I didn't know," he said, voice unsteady. "About your father, about the money, about everything." Pause. "I would have stayed." Laura listened to the message once, then deleted it. Because love that only survives ignorance was never love at all. By the time Ethan Blake truly understood what he had lost, there was nothing left to negotiate. The court filings were complete. The audits were finalized. The narrative had settled, not the one Ethan tried to tell, the one the evidence told for him. He sat in a small conference room now, not the glass-walled executive suite he once ruled from. The walls were beige, the chairs uncomfortable, the air stale. Across from him sat 3 lawyers. None of them were his. They represented creditors. One of them slid a document toward him. "Based on the forensic review," the lawyer said evenly, "Mr. Blake, your personal exposure exceeds $92 million. Ethan stared at the paper. "That's impossible," he whispered. "That money doesn't exist anymore." The lawyer nodded once. "Which is precisely the problem." Across the city, Laura signed the final transfer documents. Not hurriedly, not triumphantly, with steady hands. Her Me now sat at the top of several entities she had never known she owned. Holdings, trusts, investments. $1.3 billion. The number felt unreal, but the peace she felt was not. Richard watched her closely. "You don't have to attend the final hearing," he said gently. Laura shook her head. "I do," she replied. "Not for him. For me." Ethan's world continued shrinking. Former allies stopped responding. Friends became strangers. Invitations vanished. The board formally removed him. His company released a carefully worded statement distancing itself from individual misconduct. He read it alone in his apartment, the same apartment Laura had once filled with warmth. Now it echoed. The final court session arrived quietly, no shouting, no drama, just resolution. The judge reviewed the summary. "Mr. Blake," he said, "this court finds deliberate concealment of marital assets." Ethan stood, shoulders slumped. Laura stood too. The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Blake, the court recognizes your restraint. Your silence was not weakness, it was dignity." Laura met his gaze. "Thank you, Your Honor. The ruling was swift. Assets reassigned, claims denied, protections granted. Ethan lost more than money. He lost credibility." Afterward, in the hallway, Ethan tried one last time. "Laura," he said hoarsely. She stopped, not because she owed him anything, because closure deserves clarity. "You would have stayed," she said softly, "if I had been rich." Ethan didn't deny it. "And that," Laura continued, "is why you never knew who I really was." She walked away. Richard followed. Not once did they look back. Ethan stood alone, surrounded by people, yet completely invisible. For the first time he understood the truth. He didn't lose the divorce. He lost the moment he believed silence meant powerlessness. 6 months later, the world barely remembered Ethan. And Blake. The news cycle had moved on. Another scandal. Another fallen executive. The man who once commanded boardrooms now lived quietly on the edge of relevance, his name mentioned only in legal footnotes and cautionary case studies. He had downsized everything. The apartment, the car, the life. What hurt the most wasn't the money, it was the absence. No one asked for his opinion anymore. No one needed his approval. No one waited for his calls. Power, he learned too late, was only real when people chose to stand beside you. Laura Hale never gave interviews. She never needed to. Her name appeared in business publications, not as a scandal, but as a strategic investor, a quiet force behind major acquisitions, a woman who preferred boardrooms over spotlights. She moved differently now, not louder, stronger. At a private charity event, someone once asked her, "Was it hard, starting over?" Laura smiled gently. "I didn't start over," she said. "I finally started as myself." Richard Hale watched his daughter from a distance that night, proud but not possessive. "You won," he said quietly. Laura shook her head. "No," she replied. "I healed." Richard smiled. That answer meant more to him than any victory ever could. One evening, Laura received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page, an apology. Not dramatic, not persuasive, just tired. She read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't throw it away. She didn't respond. Some things don't need answers. Laura's life moved forward, new partnerships, new purpose, new peace. She invested in companies led by women who had been underestimated. She funded hospitals, education programs, quiet change. She never once used her story as a weapon. She didn't need to, and somewhere, in a small cafe far from glass towers and courtrooms, Ethan Blake sat alone staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He finally understood. Not everything valuable announces itself. Some power sits silently, watching, waiting. And when the moment comes, it doesn't scream, it simply wins. He thought he won the divorce, but the truth was far simpler. The game was never his to begin with.